The sun pressed down hard on the forward-deployed airbase, turning every steel panel and tarmac seam into a blade of heat. Engines whined in the background as personnel scrambled across the runway, prepping for the afternoon's highlight, an F-35B vertical landing demonstration, flown by none other than Lieutenant Briggs. At the far end of the flight line, Leah Hart moved unnoticed, her steps quiet and sure. She wore a standard-issue jumpsuit, sleeves rolled, collar open. Her name patch reading, L. Hart, Systems Assistant. Her face was calm, unreadable. In her hands, she carried a sealed diagnostics packet, edges crisp, contents confidential, meant for the operations command room. Leah kept her path tight and deliberate, weaving past stacks of gear and refueling lines without pause. But as she neared the marked walkway toward command, a voice sliced the air. "Heads up, coffee girls wandering onto the launch line." One of the crew turned, grinning, gesturing for others to look. Another added, "Somebody lose a clipboard, or is she here to hand out snacks?" Laughter rippled through the line crew. The flight lead, a broad-shouldered tech named Doyle, stepped forward and squinted at her badge. "You don't belong out here," he said, not unkindly, just dismissively. "We've got a drill starting. Grab a hose and help reset the cones. We're short." Without waiting for her reply, he pointed toward a pile of safety equipment near the hangar. Leah didn't argue. She turned, took the hose from where it coiled, and looped it over one shoulder. From behind, the jet roared to life. Briggs waved theatrically from the cockpit as ground crew whooped and cheered. Leah stopped for a moment. She watched the aircraft rise into its initial hover, framed by the summer glare. Then she turned away, unseen, and walked back toward the fire line. Leah's room in the southeast corner of the barracks was spare, quiet, and always cool. A twin bed hugged one wall, neatly made with regulation gray sheets. A single shelf held folded uniforms, a water flask, and 3 manuals, 2 official, 1 self-bound. She kept her space clean, not out of discipline, but because it gave her mind fewer places to hide. The walls were bare except for a single printout above her desk, a flight graph annotated in her own hand, tracking fan stabilization curves during high crosswind hover. She'd stopped trying to explain it to anyone after the reassignment. Once, Leah had worn a different patch. Lieutenant L. Hart, test pilot, advanced systems. Her call sign had been Echo. It was printed in small, gold-stitched letters on a pair of gloves she now kept in a drawer, wrapped in a soft cloth. She hadn't flown in over 18 months. Not since she filed the safety report on the emergency throttle override system used in F-35B vertical landings. Her report, detailed and coolly phrased, flagged a miscalibration between sensor sync and pilot input lag. It could cause rotational instability under vertical descent, especially in low wind shear. Command called it alarmist. Her supervisor suggested she let it go. She didn't. 2 weeks later, she was moved off the flight board and reassigned as support staff under engineering diagnostics. They let her keep base access but pulled her clearance level, revoked SIM privileges, and deleted her name from the next test schedule. She never got an explanation. She didn't need one. Every night, she read training documentation on her tablet while others watched basketball in the lounge. She took notes in pen, old habits, at least once a week. She pulled up her backup SIM code on a secure device and ran through vertical descent sequences in her head. Pitch, yaw, nozzle, sink, counter-thrust timing. In one simulation, her hover landing during a simulated fuel fire had scored a 97.2. No one had watched. No one reviewed the tape. In the cafeteria, Leah always sat at the far end, near the exit, close to the windows. The pilots ate in packs, laughing, elbowing trays, bragging about climbs and hard pulls. Briggs held court at the center. "He's doing the solo hover next week." One of them said, "All eyes on him." Leah heard them without listening. Her food tray was always clean when she returned it. Her fork never scraped the plate. One afternoon, while crossing from the hangar's east wing to the diagnostics bay, she passed a mechanic crouched beside a refueling line. He looked up just as she turned the corner and said to no one in particular, "She walks like a pilot." Then he shrugged and went back to work. She didn't turn back. In her desk drawer, below the gloves, she kept a photo tucked inside an envelope. It was from 3 years ago, a sunlit tarmac in Maryland. She was standing beside a test crew in front of a simulator module, grinning, helmet under one arm. Her hair had been tied back tighter then. Her flight instructor, now retired, had written a note on the corner, "Fly clean." You see more. She hadn't spoken to him since the reassignment. She didn't want him to know. Once, early in the rotation for the F-35B VTOL program, her name had been slotted as co-pilot for a dual test maneuver. She remembered seeing it on the scheduling terminal, listed below Briggs. 5 days later, she checked again. Her name was gone. The column simply read, TBD. No one mentioned it. When she asked Lieutenant Finch, he said it must have been a misprint and changed the subject. Her badge now read, Support. Systems. It wasn't inaccurate. She still helped. She ran cross-checks, rebuilt diagnostic packages, authored 6 internal updates to the flight logic parser, all credited anonymously to team-wide submissions. She didn't correct them. Sometimes, walking alone across the hangar late in the day, she'd pass the personnel board. It was digital now, touchscreen, voice-activated, rank-sorted. Her name never appeared. Once, she said it out loud. Hart. Leah. The screen blinked. No match found. She didn't try again. At night, when the hangar lights were low and the last drills had finished, she sometimes paused near the old sim pod used during the initial vertical training phase. The seat was worn. The left toggle pad needed replacing. She'd sat there through dozens of test hours once. She reached out once, touched the edge of the sim's console, then turned and walked away. The next morning, she was back at her station, packaging thermal sensor data into encrypted format for the command briefing. She did it quickly. She had time to double-check the fire safety grid before the afternoon drill. No one asked. They just handed her a checklist and moved on. The hangar buzzed with performance energy. The test flight was hours away, but already the floor was a flurry of boots, gear crates, and polished helmets. A long row of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting the prep zone in a sterile white glow. Leah stood near the edge of the foam cannon trailer, rolling fire safety cones into place with quiet efficiency. Her sleeves were pushed to the elbow, and the morning sun had already darkened the back of her neck. She adjusted the spacing of the cones, her hands steady. Inside the main prep area, Commander Walsh arrived, followed by Briggs and a half-dozen tech officers. The pilots gathered near the briefing screen, jackets slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning the fuel readouts and projected wind data. Briggs moved through the crowd like a celebrity. "All this for me. You shouldn't have," he said loudly. A few techs laughed. One of them, flipping through an old printout, stopped and did a double take. "Hey, Walsh, look at this." She was listed on the board. Right here. He held up the sheet. Hart. Leah. Co-pilot slot. Briggs turned, took the paper, scanned it. "Well, that's adorable," he said, holding it up like a menu at a comedy club. Must have been a diversity trial. Didn't stick. Huh. His gaze found Leah across the hangar. "Hey, Systems, think you still remember where the stick is?" The group turned. Phones slid discreetly from pockets. One of the junior flight staff nudged another. She actually thought she was getting in the air. He whispered. Leah didn't move. She set the last cone down and walked toward the fire cabinet to retrieve the standby blanket. As she passed a tool rack, Briggs intercepted her path, still holding the printout. "Just curious," he said, stepping into her space. "Is this your software on today's test load?" Because if so, I'll land it real soft. Promise. More laughter. He dropped the printout at her feet. One of the junior crew snorted and called out, "Someone get her the toddler headset. Might fit better." A headset pink foam padding and clearly meant for display was tossed in her direction. It skidded to a stop near her boots. The room shifted with amusement. A tech snapped a photo. Leah bent, picked up the headset, turned it over in her hand once, and set it gently on the table beside her. A younger technician, barely out of academy rotation, watched in silence. As Leah turned away, he followed her a few steps. "Aren't you mad?" he asked, voice low. She paused, barely meeting his eyes. "I've already landed harder things than this." Then she reached for the fire blanket, rolled it across one shoulder, and walked through the center of the group without looking back. Commander Walsh didn't speak. He glanced at Briggs, then at the dropped printout on the ground. A few of the senior officers shifted uneasily but said nothing. Someone whistled as Leah passed, a mocking note meant to echo. She didn't react. Outside, the heat shimmered above the tarmac. Leah adjusted the fire blanket on her shoulder like it weighed nothing at all. She moved down the yellow line alone, back to the safety zone where hoses were staged for the test. Behind her, voices rose again, looser, louder. The moment had passed. Laughter filled the hangar. The spectacle was over. But one of the maintenance leads stood near the hangar door, arms crossed. He watched Leah's figure fade into the sun haze and said quietly to himself, "They don't even see it. No one heard him. No one cared." Back inside, the pink headset sat untouched. The printout had been stepped on, and the crew was already talking about wind vectors, fuel weight, and touchdown points like the earlier moment never happened. Leah knelt beside the extinguisher crate, checking the seals. Her hands moved with methodical calm. No one noticed that she'd pre-programmed the fire drone failsafes herself the night before. No one saw her eyes glance once toward the horizon, where heat ripples rose in vertical lines. She blinked once, exhaled slowly, and got back to work. The sky was clear as Briggs made his approach, the sun behind him casting a long shadow across the bay. Ground crews gathered along the perimeter, eyes turned upward, anticipation buzzing in the air. The F-35B began its hover transition, landing gear deployed, nozzles adjusted. Inside, the control tower. Commander Walsh leaned forward, monitoring telemetry as the aircraft dipped gently into its vertical descent. Then, without warning, a concussive boom tore through the air. A fireball erupted near the munitions depot, sending debris and shockwaves across the tarmac. Metal clanged against concrete. Smoke billowed in thick columns, black and fast-moving, obscuring the far end of the landing zone. Panic bloomed. An alarm began to shriek, then another. Emergency strobes flashed red across every hangar bay. A second explosion burst from the ground near the fire suppression tanks, sending a plume of dirt and fuel mist into the air. The landing path vanished in smoke. Briggs' voice cracked over the comms. "Visuals gone. I've got nothing down there." Wind gusted sideways. The aircraft rocked violently, losing centerline balance. The tower responded, but the radio cut in and out. Abort approach. Repeat. Abort. Then static. A long pause. Then the mechanical bark of the ejection seat. The sound carried across the base, unmistakable. A moment later, a trail of white smoke arced through the sky. The jet, now pilotless, began to drift, nose tipping forward. Its engines still live. On the ground, chaos broke loose. Ground crew ran in different directions, some shouting to pull fuel lines, others looking to the tower for instruction that didn't come. The second F-35B, positioned for standby, sat prepped but unmanned near the hangar's edge. Its canopy shimmered beneath the haze, untouched. In the operations hub, officers scrambled for protocols. "Where's our backup pilot?" Walsh demanded. A technician hesitated, then said flatly, "There isn't one." Another officer pulled up live tracking. "It's drifting toward Depot 3. If that ignites, he didn't finish. Across the tarmac, people screamed for fire control, shouted into radios that no longer answered. The wind shifted, sending sheets of heat and smoke toward the weapons bay. The F-35 spiraled lower, off-axis, caught in its own exhaust vortex. The angle was bad, very bad. By the fire suppression trailer, Leah stood still. The blanket was off her shoulder now, dropped beside the hose reel. She looked once toward the falling aircraft. Then, at the second jet, its nose pointed into the smoke, systems humming beneath the canopy. No one moved with purpose. A young crew chief barked out, "Get away from the line, fall back." Someone else shouted, "The fan's going to fail, brace for impact." No one noticed her walk away from the safety line. Back at the tower, the base commander's voice was rising. "Evacuate the south apron now. Pull the fuel crates." Hands fumbled at comms gear, trying to re-establish contact with anything in the air, but there was only static and the echo of the crash about to happen. Outside, the spiraling aircraft dipped again, its trajectory locking toward the fuel corridor. On the tarmac below, the laughing stopped. All eyes turned upward. The sound of the jet's turbines warped into something unstable and wrong. No one was laughing anymore. Leah moved through the smoke like she'd rehearsed this moment in another life. The fire alarms screamed around her, sirens pitched high above the chaos, but none of it touched her focus. The second F-35B sat 20 yards away, its fuselage catching the glare of the fires behind it. Canopy closed, systems humming beneath its silent skin. A technician caught sight of her as she neared the ladder and stepped forward. Hey, that's locked down. We're not cleared for launch." Leah didn't stop. From a pouch at her hip, she pulled a worn red badge, clipped at the edge, marked with an override seal almost no one on the base recognized. She held it up briefly, a silent flash of authority, and then mounted the ladder. The technician hesitated, then froze, as if the force of her certainty alone had dismissed him. The canopy hissed open. She stepped inside. Inside the cockpit, the noise dulled to a low, insulated hum. Her hands moved in practiced sequence, fingers brushing controls she hadn't touched in over a year. Battery check, aux power engage, engine cycle spin-up, flight surface alignment. She skipped the standard lockouts, bypassed checklist pauses, and moved through the boot sequence as if she'd never left. HUD systems flared to life. The display calibrated in front of her eyes, green lines drawing clean paths through the sky. The fan vector controls pulsed under her right palm. She keyed in manual override for the landing logic, her own code. Her breathing stayed even, controlled. No adrenaline, no panic, just airflow, thrust mapping, wind cross-feed. She reached up, locked her helmet, sealed the visor, and took the stick. Outside, through the canopy glass, smoke curled in gusts. Fires bloomed to the south. The falling jet's trajectory was now seconds from impact. In the control tower, a radar officer leaned in. New movement on Pad 2. Who authorized Bravo launch? Commander Walsh turned. "What the hell is that?" A comms officer spoke into her headset. "Pilot, identify yourself. This is unauthorized. Repeat, identify." Leah said nothing. The fans roared to life, lifting her straight up. The aircraft's vertical nozzles engaged with a sharp hydraulic hiss, and the tarmac below began to shrink. The wind buffered the jet as it rose. On the ground, the crew who'd once laughed at her stood frozen. Phones hung at their sides. Nobody filmed. No one made a sound. From the sky, the heat shimmered in waves. Leah climbed through it. One tech officer finally found his voice. "Is that Hart?" No one answered. The nose of the jet cut upward into the smoke, a single rising point against the chaos. Flames twisted behind her, wind currents slamming against the hangars, but the lift held steady. The aircraft ascended smoothly into the burning air, framed in the haze like a blade drawn from fire. Leah adjusted her throttle, kept the fan guidance tight, and aligned herself with the falling jet's path. There was no more ground noise, no more orders, only the sound of her breathing through the helmet and the rise of the jet that should never have let her go. The damaged F-35B was descending too fast. Its trajectory had gone shallow, the frame rotating slowly as gravity took over. Stabilizers fought to correct it, but the air was thick with cross-currents from the earlier blasts. The weapons depot stood directly in its path, fuel lines exposed beneath the scorched concrete. From the tower, someone whispered that it was too late, but out beyond the black smoke, another jet had risen. Leah kept her fan vectors tight, adjusting in short pulses to account for wind turbulence. Her HUD displayed the failing aircraft's path, and she calculated the drop rate against the hover capacity of her own jet. 1 degree too slow, and the falling F-35 would break apart on impact. Too fast, and she'd overshoot and clip the wing. She rolled left, countered with yaw correction, and slid beneath it in a rising arc. The twin rotors of the damaged aircraft still spun erratically. As she drew closer, her eyes narrowed. She could see the ripple of heat rising from the depot's tarmac. The chemical haze shimmered, distorting her angles. She switched to manual input and used her right hand to redirect nozzle tilt, 1/2 degree at a time. With her left, she fed microbursts into the lift fan, compensating for drag. Below, the crowd had stopped moving. The alarm still flashed, but no one spoke, not even the tower. Leah eased the throttle. The sound inside the cockpit deepened, pitch dropping into the subsonic range. The two jets were now nearly aligned, her own nose just under the other's forward fuselage. With one final correction, she flared her lift vectors wide and let the downwash stabilize both airframes at once. The battered jet stopped spinning. Its descent slowed. 30 feet. 20. On the tarmac, an officer lowered his headset and whispered, "That shouldn't be possible." A ripple passed through the gathered crews. Phones were raised, but no one spoke. Not the pilots. Not the tower. Not the commanders now clustered along the blast wall. They could only watch. Leah didn't flinch. She adjusted her altitude in half-meter intervals, matching the weight drag of the descending frame. Her visor displayed wind force and velocity bleed. She cut power on one side, pulled back slightly, and used her own jet's exhaust pressure to guide the other aircraft's wheels toward the scorched concrete beside the depot. Her movements were exact. The timing was flawless. The damaged jet touched down first. Its gear hit hard but held. The frame swayed once, then settled. Then, Leah brought her own jet down, straight into the center of the fire-scarred zone. Her vertical landing was so clean the HUD registered a 0 drift margin. When the hydraulic system cycled and the landing gear locked, she closed her eyes just once. Then she shut the engines down. Outside, nothing moved. The crowd stood at the perimeter, heat waves curling around their boots. A few took hesitant steps forward. Someone lowered their phone, screen still recording, and let it hang at their side. Near the tower wall, a mechanic dropped to one knee. Whether from shock or reverence, no one asked. Another officer muttered. She saved the entire base. The canopy hissed open. Leah climbed down alone. Her boots hit the pavement without a sound. Smoke drifted across the landing zone, fires still licking at the edges of the depot, but none reached her. Her visor reflected the glow burning orange and gold until she unlatched it and let it fall back. Her face was calm. No visible effort. No need to speak. From behind the hangar line, Commander Walsh arrived, flanked by 2 aides. His eyes tracked the jet, the scorched runway, the depot still intact. Then he looked at her. No words came. Leah walked toward them without rush. Her posture was level. Her steps left faint prints in the soot. As she passed the row of shocked technicians and pilots, no one moved to stop her. Not one of them spoke. The depot's perimeter had held. The fire team reported 0 breach. The tower confirmed recovery of the ejected pilot. No casualties. Behind her, the 2 aircraft sat side by side. One tilted and burned, the other pristine. A news drone hovered overhead now, its lens zoomed tight on her path. She didn't look at it, didn't break stride. Greatness had already spoken. The sound was a vertical landing in a field of fire, and it was the only voice left that mattered. The board outside operations was digital again. The glitch in the display from the fire suppression failures finally resolved. It cycled slowly through the updated roster. At the top, under Vertical Systems Certified Personnel, the name L. Hart had reappeared. A few technicians lingered near it longer than usual, pretending to be checking flight schedules. No one dared to say much aloud. Leah's override badge was reactivated within 48 hours. Her clearance access was quietly reinstated. No ceremony, no handshake, just an alert on her device, and a new ID envelope slid under her door one morning. Inside it was a reissued credentials card and her old flight gloves returned, not replaced. Someone had cleaned them. In the days that followed, the hangar floor grew quieter when she passed. The same men who had once jeered fell silent now. A few stood when she entered a room. Others nodded with a restraint that bordered on apology. But Leah never altered her pace. She responded only with the smallest gestures, a glance, a brief nod, a hand placed once on a railing before moving on. Media requests came fast and persistent. National outlets, military news wires, aviation networks, all wanted the same thing: a statement, a quote, a headline. The unidentified pilot who executed the most precise VTOL save in program history. Leah declined them all. At the base cafe, she was seen twice that week. Once at the window table with her gloves in hand, sipping black coffee from a paper cup. The second time, Briggs passed her on the way out. He stopped, nodded, his face tense with something unspoken. She returned the gesture, expression neutral, and didn't rise from her seat. That was all. Behind the scenes, Command had opened a quiet inquiry. A retired systems engineer, brought in to assess the fire damage, reviewed the final telemetry logs. Midway through the report, he froze. "Who wrote this code?" he asked. When told it originated from the emergency balance override module shelved 18 months ago, he blinked. That was Leah Hart's algorithm. The revelation made its way to base operations. A junior analyst printing records muttered the phrase aloud as he scanned the personnel file. "We buried a weapon." His voice carried through the room. No one argued. Flashbacks returned in fragments, as if stored somewhere just under the skin. Leah, at 17, watching a test reel on a cracked monitor, an early-generation VTOL crash. Pilot ejected too late, the craft spinning into an unmarked landing field. The moment the left nozzle broke free. She'd understood the flaw, long before any system did. She remembered pressing pause, stepping forward, rewinding the footage again and again, absorbing every frame. She remembered how her father had looked at her across the living room, a half-drunk cup of tea in hand, and said, "That's not something you walk away from." She'd nodded. "Then we build something you can land with." Years later, she'd spent nights writing and rewriting those calculations. The emergency balance subroutine was never meant to be primary. It was designed to take over only when everything else failed. That day, everything had failed. At dusk, 3 days after the incident, she walked alone out to the edge of the flight line. Her visor was clipped down, casting a soft reflection of the horizon where the sun met the steel. Behind her, the base grew quiet. Briefing lights dimmed. Engines cooled. Somewhere, far off, someone swept the edge of the barracks walkway. The tarmac beneath her boots was still scarred from the fires. She stepped over one long burn mark and paused. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of jet fuel and heat-worn asphalt. She stood for a long time. There was no applause, no medal, no stage. Just the runway, and the silence, and the knowledge that, when it mattered, she had stepped forward, not because she was told to, but because no one else could. She didn't need a title for that. The fire hadn't made her great. It had only made her visible. She turned and walked down the tarmac, her gloves tucked into her belt, her path lit by the last golden light of the evening. The line stretched ahead, long and straight, the same runway she had once been told to avoid. Now, it carried only her, and the sound of her steps, and the echo of a landing that no one would ever forget. Leah Hart was never loud, never seeking attention. She was overlooked, reassigned, and dismissed by a system that failed to recognize the quiet strength it buried. But when the moment came when failure loomed and silence fell, she rose without permission, guided not by pride, but by purpose. Her story is a reminder that greatness doesn't always wear medals or demand applause. Sometimes it moves unseen, patiently waiting for the world to catch up. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever held back because the world couldn't see your worth, remember Leah. Let her story remind you that power doesn't need a spotlight to exist. What part of her journey resonated with you most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and follow for more stories that celebrate quiet strength and those who rise when it matters most.